Welcome into Talkin Dynasty. Look, if you are on the Dynasty Nerds feed right now, you're like, wait, am I listening to the correct show? You are. You are listening to the correct show. Talkin Dynasty was a little offshoot, a little side hustle, a little side project of myself, Garret Price, and my good friend Jared Wackerly. Jared, how's it going, buddy?
Pretty good. How about you?
Good, good. This was just a little side project that we started doing. We did 7 or 8 episodes of this, and it was its own separate feed. And we got a lot of good feedback from the show. It ties into Dynasty Nerds very well, but it's just a little different, a little off enough that it makes it a good complement to the main show. So we're like, why are we wasting time doing 2 separate feeds, 2 separate shows? Let's just marry it all together. Let's just bring these 2 entities together. Now Dynasty Nerds and the Nerd Herd have more goodness. And that's what we want. So Jared, I don't know if you want to get into it a little bit, but from my perspective, the difference between, other than just, slightly different hosts, the difference between the normal Dynasty Nerd show and Talkin Dynasty is kind of that next level. We're not going to do as much. We'll do a little bit, but we're not going to do as much. Hey, I really like player X. I don't like player Y. There's not going to be as much of that. As opposed to telling you what to think, it's more about how to think through playing the game of Dynasty. A little more game theory type of stuff that we're going to be bringing in this show. Jared, anything else that I'm kind of missing from the general synopsis of how this works versus the normal Dynasty Nerd show?
Yeah, so another thing I'll add is it gives us the opportunity to bring on guests, other folks from around the Dynasty community that are analysts that have their own shows that analyze the game just like us. We don't do that on the main Dynasty Nerd show. So on our previous episodes, you can go back. We've interviewed guys like Scott Connor, David Zach. Who else have we had on?
Matthew Betts. He's a physical therapist, great with injuries. We had him on as well. So we've had some really good guests, as you were saying.
Yeah. So just game theory around Dynasty, how to think, like you said, not what to think. A little less player talk, more just overall about the game.
Yeah, we've done stuff on Devy leagues. We've done stuff on trading. We've done stuff on injuries.
We got into war, wins above replacement with Scott. Yeah. That was awesome. So that was our last episode.
That was our last episode.
Which was a little hiatus.
Yeah, we took a break around the holiday time, kind of caught our breath a little bit because the fantasy, it's a lot. It is a lot. And we thought we would come back strong in the new year, bring it onto the main feed. So I'm genuinely excited to kind of have this all married together, have it simpatico. I think it's going to be really fun. But today, simpatico. I don't even know if that's the right word. As the host of a Dynasty Nerd show, you have to say incorrect words at times. It's kind of just mandated. Rich has laid that groundwork, and I have to follow through with it. So that being said, today we are looking at the offseason. For some of you, the dreaded offseason, but for a lot of us, it's low-key kind of the best time of year. Now, there are definitely lulls in the offseason, but I truly think that even though the season obviously is so much fun and so important, the offseason, the moves you make in the offseason are just as important, maybe even more so, Jared.
Yeah, this is when the sharks feed, smell blood in the water, start taking advantage of value. And I don't know. You got to look at your league. Some leagues, some of my home leagues, there's no chatter. No one's involved, dude. It's just like, yeah, they're still on their holiday hangover. But once the draft starts getting closer, like, got to prepare for the draft, the day before.
Yeah, exactly. So what we wanted to do in this episode is we wanted to get into things that we should be doing in the offseason, kind of an offseason checklist, if you will. Things that you should really be thinking through. Some of it's going to be geared a little more towards commissioners. But most of it is going to be information that anyone can use, even if you're not the commissioner of your league. Anybody, it's useful information that will help make your league better, but more importantly, make your individual teams better and have a better shot at success as the fantasy season goes on. So one of the big things, and Jared and I went back and forth, talked about some of the things that we like to do individually and things that we think are important for the health of our teams and the health of our leagues. And one of the big ones that Jared was really adamant about, and rightfully so, is this. We got to talk about rule changes, because we always get questions about rule changes, when to do it, how to do it, all of that kind of stuff. And this really is the perfect time. So Jared, I'll let you go ahead and start with that, and I'll kind of jump in. But what should we be doing as far as implementing new rules in our leagues?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously analyzing your own teams are important, but just as important is making sure the health of your league is as best as it can be. And that starts with any rule changes should be voted on as a league. It should never be, I'm the commissioner, this is what I want.
I'm the captain now.
I'm the captain. Yeah, we're moving to Superflex. So we can start with that one. I mean, that's a big one.
That's a big one. I happen to have
Superflex,
5 quarterbacks, so we're going to Superflex.
Yeah, no, you can't do that. So we can start with that. Like, Superflex has kind of become the norm now, just like just like standard scoring transition to PPR. Now we're starting to see more leagues start with Superflex, tight end premium. So how do we transition a 1 quarterback league to a Superflex league? I'm currently doing this in my home league.
It is hard.
It was hard, it just took some convincing and explaining why should we transition to a Superflex league. One, I think it reflects the true value of the quarterback position, just like it does in reality. The quarterbacks are the most important player on the field for their team, and this should be reflected in fantasy football too. I mean, this is what we're aiming to achieve, is not necessarily exactly like reality, but somewhat similar, especially in terms of valuation. So when you're playing 12 more quarterbacks, or you can start 12 more quarterbacks in your league, obviously that's going to put more demand and value on those players. So what we did is we pushed the change out for 3 years. So everyone had 3 years, or has 3 years, to get their roster in order, to take that into account when making trades, trading for draft picks, even making draft picks in rookie drafts. 3 years we're making the change. So we didn't, I actually put a tweet out, and some people suggested, everyone has to shed all of their quarterbacks except for 2. You're allowed to keep 2. Anything that you've seen before, or have you done this before, Garrett?
I've even seen it where you can only keep a quarterback. You can keep 1 quarterback and then everyone else, and then you kind of redraft from there. But I think the most common way that I've seen people go about this is, hey, we're doing this, but we're not going to implement it for 3 more seasons. So everyone has sufficient time to trade, draft, that kind of thing as far as the quarterback position goes. That's what I've seen most commonly.
Yeah. And another pro to making your league a Superflex leagues is the depth of the rookie drafts. So with the push up of the value and demand of the quarterbacks, you typically see the quarterbacks go first off the board early in the first, whereas in 1 QB league, that doesn't really happen. So now all those wide receivers, running backs, and tight ends, depending if it's tight end premium or not, they start to fall back a little bit, and then the value of those early seconds, mid seconds become that much greater. And it's just it's a more fun experience, all the picks just carry more value to them.
Yeah, absolutely. They do for sure. I only play in one quarterback league, and it's my oldest league. It's my home league. Like, it's the only 1 quarterback league I play in. But even that league was cutting edge at the time. because we did a half point per completion for quarterbacks. So it did raise the value of quarterbacks, even though depth-wise it didn't. It did make those top-tier quarterbacks much more valuable than kind of that second and third tier, because completing passes was such a premium. But yeah, that's the only one quarterback league that I play in, to my knowledge. I think, I don't have any others. So with that, the other thing that I've seen is I've seen people even go not just to the quarterbacks, but entirely next level, where they basically will tear everything down almost to the studs, not necessarily redrafting, but they'll take their teams down to, you get to pick 5 players you're going to keep, and then everything else. So it really kind of does revitalize the league, refresh the league, that kind of stuff. So there are a lot of ways to, quote unquote, skin this cat. Like, there's a lot of ways to go about making this happen. But the biggest thing is, make sure it is done in a way that is fair for the entire league. Because remember, teams built their squads based on it being one quarterback.
Yeah.
So it is really difficult and borderline unfair at times to change from your original settings. Like that's, I'm willing to like concede it, but I still don't even love doing that. Like, at that point, it's almost like you have to just do a new draft, because teams built, and same thing with scoring correction, like changing the scoring settings. You drafted based on those scoring settings.
Or at least you should have.
You should have, in theory, if you were doing it correctly. You did that on those scoring settings, and you made trades based on those scoring settings. So to just in 1 year, poof.
Yeah, you can't do it in 1 year.
You can't do it. So for me, if you're going to go to Superflex, I almost feel like it has to be a unanimous vote, not just hey, we got the majority, 7 of the 12 said yes, because a couple of those guys could have really been strategizing. No, I intentionally only have one quarterback because I faded it in the draft. And yes, I know it's an older guy, but that's how I built it. But now you're telling me I need young guys, and I need a lot of them to, like, that sucks. So I don't know how you feel about this, but I feel like it almost has to be a if not unanimous, it has to be a very, very strong majority yes vote on this, or you should not switch a 1 QB league to a Superflex league.
Yeah, no, I'd be cool with that. It depends how bad or how good my team was set up to be Superflex. You know, if I'm really set up well for it to go to Superflex, then 6 of 12 is good. But
we're fine.
No, I think a change like that, you're shaking up the entire economics of the league, the values of all players. So that's like in my league why we pushed it out for 3 years. Like, hey, you can still play for 3 more years the way that you have set up your roster, but start preparing, valuing the trades with that in mind. And it's been a pretty smooth transition. There really wasn't much kickback, especially with it becoming like the common the way people are playing these days. There's a lot more content out there these days on Superflex, so everyone's kind of heard of it at this point, and it's makes the league better. I mean, I don't see like the cons to. I think it just makes the league better. So I don't really. There's not really much of an argument against it, other than, like you just said, hey, I only have Kirk Cousins for a reason, or Matthew Stafford for a reason. Now you guys are screwing me.
Yeah.
I would just explain to that guy, hey, it's for the better of the league. You know, it's going to make the league better. Sometimes that's what you got to do.
Yeah. So figure out a way, like we said, whether it's pushing it out several years, whether that's everyone puts their quarterbacks in except one quarterback, however you want to do it, but find a way to try to make it as fair and as equitable as possible. And if you're doing a redraft of the quarterbacks, use the Dynasty Nerds rankings and say, okay, whoever has the worst starting quarterback, they get the first pick of the rest of the quarterbacks. Whoever has the second worst gets, like, try to make it as fair and as equitable as possible, because at the end of the day, for most people, there are some of us that we're just in 40 leagues and we're degenerates and but for most people, they're in a league, they're in 3 leagues, they're in 5 leagues, but most of these are their buddies, people they know, they have relationships with. The worst thing you can do is just blow all this up. And I've seen lost friendships over fantasy football, which is silly, but I've seen it happen. It's not worth it.
It usually happens when the commissioner like somehow loses or doesn't have the buy-in because they use it on, or they don't have everybody's buy-ins because they use it as Christmas gifts for their kids or something.
Oof, brutal.
I've seen that happen.
Oof.
Next one here. No trade deadlines.
Ooh.
This is becoming more and more, I don't know if you want to call it mainstream, but
in vogue.
Traditionally, I still don't have a league that does not have a trade deadline, but I wish I did. I'd love to play that way.
Yeah.
Because I kind of am on the side of why are we restricting people from being able to make moves during the playoffs? Like, why?
I get it.
Demand is demand, you know?
I love pushing back the trade deadline as far as possible, like up to the week of the playoffs.
Same.
I still don't like the in playoff trading, because
Why?
it does feel like you should have been prepared. Like you had all this time up until the playoffs, the day before your playoffs started. You had all this time to prepare with a backup quarterback, with a backup running back to get more depth here, to improve there. If you are now mad because my quarterback just got hurt, now I'm down to 1, you should have bolstered that position. You had all that time to bolster the position. You didn't. That's on you as a manager for not being prepared for the playoffs. So that's the way I look at it, as it's a get out of jail free card for those managers that didn't prepare for the worst case scenario.
I can see that. And if you do have a trade deadline, like you should prepare that way. I think that rule change obviously would just change your mentality or how you go about things. Because I think it actually, no trade deadlines probably benefits the non-playoff teams more than the playoff teams.
It couldn't
almost, because those guys are going to have to pay up like more than they would, or at least they should, and you should make them, because the demand for your players is that much greater, because the playoff teams, they're not trying to trade away anybody right now. They're trying to compete. So if you're not in the playoffs, the demand for your Joe Flacco that you have has been going off the last 2 weeks. All of a sudden, you might be able to get a 2nd-round pick for him because that guy's trying to win. And who I don't know who went down or can't play a week in the playoffs. You know, they should be able to fill that hole with someone like that. Or I would like to experience it. I haven't played that way, so I don't truly know how I would feel about it. But in my head, I would enjoy like just no regulation on what I'm able to do as a manager. Like, let me manage my team, and let the economics play out how they play out, because the demand and everything shifts at that time. And it would be cool to be able to make moves or fleece a guy because he wants to win now, and props to him for doing that. That's what he should be doing. And I'm able to sell off this guy when I'm not playing, because I'm paying attention and I'm active. So I don't know. I'm either way on it. I can go either way on it.
Yeah. And I don't hate it. It's not like I won't play in a league that has it that way. I think of as much as I think I'm like cutting edge guy and all the new rules, like that's the one that I still struggle with. Like I still struggle with that one, being an old curmudgeon. One other one that I think, hopefully you had this on the onset of your league, but if you didn't and you weren't prepared ahead of time, please get some sort of tanking rule in place. Your league can decide what that should be. Some like it a lot more strict. Some like it a little more open-ended, fine. However you want to do it, but have something in place, because there's nothing worse than a manager doing what is within the rules and allowed, and the rest of the league getting upset with them, but they didn't technically do anything wrong because there's no rule against it. So make sure you have very clear rules, as clear as you want to make them. If you want to make it a little more open-ended, that's fine. But make sure you have something in place that helps with the tanking policy, because there will be teams that are going to get upset because so-and-so's tanking. And he says, well, there's no rule against it, so why am I not allowed to?
Yeah.
It's what the Sixers did. And, whatever. Trust the process. So
well, John's really mad because he thinks you should have played this guy over this guy, and it clearly should have, but it's a little, I see it all the time.
There's a lot of different ways around it. There's a lot of different rules you can put in place. I don't think we need to necessarily get into all the variants there and all of the different things that you could do with that, but make sure you have something in place if you don't already. Make sure
get a general. I mean, it takes. I posted on our Nerds Discord, Nerd Herd Discord, a copy of a bylaws that I use for most of my leagues that I manage, and I use it. I change up the language however I need to, but it's always there to use. And so if you're in the Nerd Herd Discord, it's in the Find a League channel that people post their open leagues or leagues they're starting or orphans that they need filled in there, and it's in there as a template. But
that's why I do love having small devies, at least, because it really on its own discourages thinking, like, what's the point? All the good players for next year are already taken anyway. So that's why I like it. But anyway, anything else with rule changes and things like that before we move on?
Along with tanking, max points for non-playoff teams can help kind of alleviate the tanking situation, because if you don't play that way, I do this in most of my leagues. So non-playoff teams get seeded or they get their rookie draft position based off the inverse order of max points for. So basically that fills every week, it fills all your starting lineup positions with the top point scorers at those positions. It's best ball. Yeah. So basically if you started, crappy guys, it's still going to take into account your bench guys that you should have played there. So it kind of helps mitigate that situation. And I like it because it truly gives the worst teams in your league or the worst rosters in your team in your league the first few draft picks. And then there's no arguments for who should have started what,
Yeah, absolutely. All right, well, let's move into a little more nuanced, a little more you focus as opposed to team centric. Let's look at what we should be doing as managers. The first thing, step one, if you're a part of the Nerd Herd, some of this work is already done for you. If not, no worries. But I like to go and I like to look at every position on my team. I like to look at my quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, tight ends. I say, okay, in 2024, how does my roster look? Am I weak at this position? Am I strong at this position? And then I base that off of what opportunities do I have this year? Do I have a lot of draft capital? So, I can fix some of those holes potentially through the draft. Are there some potential trade partners out there? So going in, taking a real look at your team. And the reason I said, if you're part of the Nerd Herd, some of this work's already done for you. If you go to the Dynasty GM, it will already tell you your ranking as far as each individual position in your league. Your 9th at quarterback, your 2nd at running back, your 5th at receiver, and 12th at tight end. And so right there, man, I'm kind of all over the map. I look like a middle of the road team probably. Man, I got to figure out, am I in or am I out? What am I doing? That kind of stuff. So if you're part of the Nerd Herd, you've got a leg up in that. But I think we got to go take an honest look at our team. And sometimes we're not as good at taking an honest look. That's, once again, the GM helps with that. It's not biased towards your team or anybody else's team. It's just how it's ranked, as far as my rankings, Rich's rankings, Jared's rankings, Matt's rankings. And then we also include like some ADP stuff.
Or your own rankings.
Or your own rankings. Yeah, you can go in there and put your own rankings. If you do want it to be a little bit biased, you can go put your own in and see how it goes. So taking a good look at your team, I think is step one.
Yeah. Look at your roster, see who's aging, like what guys are maybe aging out past the value cliff at wide receiver or running back. And at wide receiver, that's typically around age 29. That's really when you start seeing them take a nosedive in terms of value. They're not really going to be gaining value from any point forward. Running back, it's typically around age 27
ish. Yeah.
It's usually when it starts.
Unless you're
Christian, they're not really going to be. Yeah. Unless you're Christian McCaffrey. Yeah. You're a diamond. I mean, just a complete elite player. And you mentioned strengths and weaknesses of your roster, and that's super important. But I do like to just little caveat to that is like right now there really are no strengths and weaknesses of your roster because we're not playing any games right now. So
true.
What I typically like to do is try to identify guys that I can maybe trade for early in the offseason right now that maybe are coming out of situations that really dampen their value, kind of like Drake, anybody in Atlanta's offense this year.
Sure.
Pass catchers like Drake London, Kyle Pitts, like what players that we identified that have elite talent and that maybe just last 1, maybe even 2 years.
Well, I think you bring up a good point here, Jared, because it was kind of going to be what I was going to get into next was take a look at your players and what situations are going to be changing for those players on your team. Because in a vacuum, we can say like, yeah, Saquon Barkley's a good player, but is he going to be with the Giants next year? Is he going to be with the Cowboys next year? Is he going to be in Kansas City next year? Is he going to be like, we don't know where he's going to be. So we have to kind of take some educated guesses on where we think these kind of players can go. And then what does that mean for their value? Does that increase their value? Does that decrease their value? Same thing with guys like who would be a good example? Jalen Hyatt. Okay. Jalen Hyatt, 3rd round rookie pick from this past year, showed some flashes. If you're excited about him being potentially the wide receiver 1 on his team next year, well, you probably need to go look at the Giants draft capital and look and say, actually, this is a really good wide receiver draft. The odds of them adding another wide receiver via the draft, probably pretty high. So is he going to lose potentially some value because there's somebody else that's going to be getting targets ahead of him? So we're looking at all of the players like that. So the age is definitely part of it, like you mentioned, Jared, but all the way around, coaches, age, free agency, draft, like there are so many different factors that can affect a player's value. Ultimately, the biggest one is their ability, but that's only a piece of the puzzle. There's a lot of other pieces that affect a lot of things.
And just to help you and guide you in determining player value, you should be looking at things like ADP, which we are working on getting up on the Dynasty Nerds app and the site very, very soon. I mean, I'm talking within the next month. We should have that up. Listen to me, acting like Rich.
You sound like Rich. Yeah.
Giving dates and stuff.
Giving dates out there.
But we just met about that, and that's something that we're focusing on getting it up. But there's ADP out there, and then Keep Trade Cut. That's a site that people like to use. It's aggregated information, and people are voting on who you should keep, who you should trade, who you should cut, and it helps create player value. So you can take a look at that just to kind of gauge player values and where they stand within the Dynasty space, and then obviously rankings from us. So those are just tools that can help guide you in figuring out and pinpointing players that might be undervalued, overvalued, so on and so forth.
Absolutely. So, and look, you're going to do your best not procrastinating.
Cost analysis?
No, I don't leave it in there. People can hear me stutter. Anyway, prognosticate. What? I can't get it. Basically, you're going to
prognosticate.
Prognosticate. That's what I was looking for. Yeah. You're going to do your best to predict what's going to happen in these situations. You're not going to get it right 100% of the time. But if you're reading the tea leaves, you're following beat writers, you can usually get a pretty good idea. So here's an example of one that could it blow up in my face? Sure. But a player that I'm kind of looking at and targeting maybe a little bit this offseason, Jerry Jeudy. Jerry Jeudy seems like a guy that just really needs a change of scenery. His value could not be lower. So the risk in kind of throwing him in on a trade, you're not going to have to pay a lot to get him. But the potential upside is maybe he's closer to the guy that the Broncos drafted on a different team. Is there another team that can get the best out of him? Is there a Chargers team that could use him? Is there a Chiefs team that could use him? A Giants team that could use him? And, depending on where he goes and what quarterback he goes to, it could be a tick up. Chances are it can't get much worse, And so I'm looking at a player like that where his value is in the gutter, but realistically, there's not much lower that it could possibly get. And if it does, it cost me the equivalent of a early 3rd round pick or, whatever. It didn't cost me much to acquire him. I wouldn't acquire him straight up because then people are always like, why do you want him? That's fishy. But if he's the throw in on another deal, then that's usually the way to go. But all that to say, and look, if you're like, I disagree, Jared Jeudy's a bum, that's fine. Don't focus as much in on the specifics of the player I gave you, but look at that as a template of maybe that's the type of player that I go out and I look for. The one that with a change of scenery, chances are he'll have a better quarterback situation. He'll have a better, target situation. He'll have a better whatever. And those are the types of players that'll kind of help you gauge on your squad. Yeah, maybe that's one of those small moves that I can make that isn't going to really move the needle a lot for most people. But if I can take a guy who on this team, he's the 5th wide receiver, and partway through the year, he's playing for me, and now he's my wide receiver 3. Well, now you just gained a bunch of value on your roster with very little risk. So those are the types of concepts that I'm talking about. Who are the players that, because of whatever's going on, coaching wise, free agency wise, draft wise, are going to fluctuate in value? And conversely, there's certain players on your roster right now that you need to say, I need to find out a way to get rid of this guy because I feel like there's a very good chance that his value is going to drop significantly within the next 6 months. So I would rather get out now while the value is still very high before the bottom drops out. So that's all part of that evaluating of your team.
Yeah, and for those guys that the value might drop out of, but and it's an age situation, but you think they're still going to be scoring points. Are you thinking you're going to compete this year, or are you are you in a rebuild situation like that? That's when you would want to pivot off those guys. And kind of like you said before, I would allow situation changes to kind of dictate where I'm looking. Like coaching changes, quarterback changes. I would really be paying attention to those situations to see who within that situation I should really pay attention to and target, maybe as a buy or as a sell. Because sometimes, when they bring in those new regimes, some of those mid-round draft pick guys, those 3rd-round picks that we like, those 4th-round picks that we like, they kind of, they get pushed to the side a little bit. And they may not get that opportunity that we once hoped. So I think we can kind of move on to more like roster construction a little bit, or how
one more thing. Last one I got here. I also want you to be looking at the rest of your league's rosters.
That's really important.
Yeah. So I talked about your team, but you need to be looking at the rosters of the rest of your league. Specifically, the one area that I want to key in on is there are teams that are good and have been good for a while in your league. Most leagues have them. Look at those teams, because our hubris allows us to think that when we're on top, that peak is a long ride. Typically, it's really tough to win back-to-back titles or 3 in a row. Like, does not happen very often. Every once in a blue moon it will, but it's very, very tough. Look at those teams that just want to ship with guys like Keenan Allen, with Derrick Henry, with Mike Evans, with, all of these players
Raheem Mostert.
Yeah. That you're like, how much longer can they really sustain success? Or is that cliff coming quickly? Because even though right now you're like, why would I trade for the guy that has the 112 this year? Yeah, don't trade for the 112, but trade for his 2025 first.
Yeah.
Look at his next year's pick. Because he might not realize that he doesn't have much longer. But he
might be oblivious. He's just coming off that ship. He's high on his team.
Exactly.
I could do anything.
He just got the check. The check just cashed.
Yeah.
Go look at those rosters. So check out everyone else's roster. Those picks specifically are ones that you should target. But even players, like I mentioned with the Jerry Jeudy thing, look at what players you think might be changing situations and ones you can acquire.
Send him a running back. Sell a running back.
There you go.
That's coming off a good year. No, I'm glad you brought that up. That's a good point. Something that everyone should be paying attention to. And the Dynasty GM makes that really easy to do.
Yeah.
So yeah, let's talk a little bit, just touch on roster construction stuff a little bit. How you might want to think about dropping or changing up, rostering a bunch of wide receivers, running backs. Should you be rostering tight ends, quarterbacks, that kind of thing? And I do want to touch on, if your league allows for players to remain on IR throughout the offseason, dude, I'm filling those spots up with as many as IR guys as I can. And that's just freeing up more roster space for other people. And maybe when those guys come back from injury, there's a situation change and they all of a sudden have value, because every single player has potential value.
Right.
And it just depends on what happens. And there's so much yet to happen this offseason. So much that can happen. So many players are going to get signed to different teams, and draft new rookies coming in that are going to change the values of the players on the team already. So I like to fill those spots and taxi spots. Obvious. Take advantage of those. You shouldn't have any empty spots on your taxi squad. Some leagues have waivers locked right now. In my home league, we lock waivers until after the Super Bowl, just because everyone's kind of checked out right now anyway. But if waivers are open, you should be active there. You should be paying attention to what's going on in the playoffs, who's getting touches, and just capitalizing on everyone else sleeping at the wheel.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think that's a great point. When you look at specific roster construction, we had the conversation with Scott Connor. If you didn't listen to that episode, go back and listen to it. He is a big proponent of rostering as few tight ends as possible. I don't know that I'm quite the extremist that he is, but he did start to win me over on some of that, where, we're waiting so long for a lot of these guys to break out. And really, they're just roster cloggers, for lack of a better term. A lot of these, is this the year Charlie Kohler breaks out? Is this the year that, all of these guys? Yeah. We just have all these guys. So I have, with the exception of a few guys that I personally feel have crazy upside, I have started to trim down on the amount of tight ends that I hold on to. Because I would rather fill that spot specifically with running backs and quarterbacks in super flex leagues. Yeah. Wide receiver, I get it. We do want to build around wide receivers, but the hit rate from low drafted wide receivers is very, very low. Now we're coming off a year, of course, where Puka Nacua was this amazing rookie that was drafted in the 5th round. But he is very much so an anomaly. We don't, and how often can you start those guys? Like, think about it from a non-best ball perspective. How often can you start a guy that is a team's 3rd or 4th wide receiver that you're excited about and he's growing and blah, blah, blah? Almost never, because you never know when the week that he's getting 6 catches for 112 yards and 2 touchdowns, because all the rest of the weeks he's getting 2 catches for 12 yards and you're frustrated.
Yeah.
Whereas
it doesn't matter if they did it.
Right.
Like, it only matters if you were able to start them. Yeah.
Now, conversely, at the running back position, we usually have a pretty good idea of who's getting touches. You know, did the starting running back go out? Okay, well, he's the number 2, so he's probably going to get a majority of the workload. Or, hey, they've been increasing his workload on 3rd down, so we should be expecting 8 to 12 touches today. Like, those things are much more predictable. And they also have a higher hit rate. When you go back and look at later round running backs, specifically day 3 guys versus day 3 wide receivers, the hit rate on day 3 running backs is much higher. So why would we not fill our roster with more of those guys, even if 80, 90, 95% of them don't hit? If Kyron Williams hits, it's worth it. If Aaron Jones hits, it's worth it. If Arian Foster, if James Robinson, if whoever, if any of those guys hit, man, how much has that value increased? Drastically. As much as I loved Darius Slayton and still do and have him on a lot of rosters, it's very rare that I've felt comfortable starting him. Even though he is a guy that went from a late round pick to be relevant, I still had a hard time knowing when I could start him. Whereas other guys, even though it was short-lived, Jerick McKinnon, I knew when I could start him at times. But you catch my drift. So I have become a big proponent of let's roster more running backs. And then if you want to get into even the backup quarterback situation, Jared, as well, I think that one's kind of interesting.
It's the same. It's the same theory, really. I mean, it's just comes with predictability of the position comes value. So guys know what they're paying for when they are going to send you a 3rd round pick for a backup running back because they need a filler for that week. And you know that Nick Chubb went out for the year and Jerome Ford's going to should get most of the work going forward. And then as the season went on, you know, Jerome Ford really became a nice piece. So same with the quarterback position. You know, Anthony Richardson goes down. Okay, Gardner Minshew's a starter now. I mean, you can pay a 2nd round pick if you absolutely need Gardner Minshew, or I'm selling him for 2/3, something like that. Like, you're going to be able to flip these guys at the running back and quarterback position a lot easier than you're going to be able to flip a tight end that kind of waiting on and hoping on, that's showing some flashes, or a receiver that's a wide receiver 3, a KJ Osborne in his offense that's going to get you maybe 6 to 8 points, but you never really know when to start him. So completely agree, Garrett. I'm rostering as many running backs and quarterbacks as I can that makes sense. And I'm trying to shed some of that fat, or cut off some of that fat in terms of tight ends and wide receivers, because roster positions are valuable, man. Like every player's potential value. So
yeah,
be paying attention.
Keaton Mitchell was a great example from this year, where looked like a long shot to start the year, but I don't know. Unfortunately, he had that big injury, but he had a couple weeks where dude was balling, like absolutely balling.
You put him on IR now.
Yeah. McLaughlin, another one that had a stretch there. So these guys, they can pop up. They can have some relevance in the league. I'm not saying you can't roster wide receivers and upside guys. You can't. If there are guys that you really believe in, then absolutely go after those guys. But if you're just up in the air about a couple players, who should I add, who should I drop, blah blah blah. When it's up in the air, err towards the side of these quarterbacks, err towards the side of these running backs, because you never know when it's going to be Brock Purdy.
You want to play a game real quick?
Let's do a quick game.
So I pulled up some depth charts. I'm just gonna list off some backup running backs, and you give me a yes or no if you would consider rostering them.
It's probably going to be a lot of yeses because. Okay.
All right. What about Michael Carter in Arizona?
Yep.
Amari DiMercato.
That would be a fringe one.
He's fringe, right? Are you still rostering Cordell Patterson?
Probably not, especially with a new coach coming in.
Yeah. Ty Johnson.
Yeah, I think I would.
Miles Sanders. I'm just kidding. Let's see. DJ Dallas.
Always, and DJ Dallas will die on my rosters.
Let's see. I'm trying to find some.
Well, the biggest ones are really those like first and second year backs, especially.
Yeah. I know. I keep finding them, and it's just like every single one's like kind of obvious.
Sure.
It's like if they're a backup running back and they're number 2 on the depth chart, if they're number 2 on the depth chart, the answer is yes.
Then they're number 1 in your heart.
Yes, the answer is yes.
Yeah.
That game would probably work better for quarterback, but that's okay. Okay.
But we get the point. The point came across though. There's a lot of these guys that I would rather roster them than Miles Boykin. Like.
Here's a good one that I'd be targeting: Tank Bigsby.
Tank Bigsby's a great one. Absolutely. Those first and second year backs, things just didn't quite work out this year, but I mean, you never know what's going to happen with injury, especially at the running back position. At wide receiver, if you're the wide receiver 4, an injury happens at the wide receiver position. You're still the third guy, like it doesn't help you much.
What are we doing with Isaiah Spiller and Clyde Edwards-Helaire? We cutting bait with these guys?
No. Should we? Yes. But no. I mean, like I would still rather roster them than a lot of those late receivers.
Dude, you know what paid off in this whole mindset and this theory around rostering backup running? Zamir White.
Like Ty Chandler.
He carries his value has shot up now.
Especially
with the Jacobs. One. Yep, Ty Chandler is another good one.
Yeah.
Yeah. We don't have to beat this to death, but I think everybody gets the point.
Yeah.
You should be doing it.
That's more of our off-season kind of checklist. Things to go through, things to look at, things to judge on your team, other people's teams, your entire league. If you have other things that you think need to be added to the checklist, why don't you reach out to us? Where can they find you, Jared?
I'm everywhere. Everywhere. I am on the X machine at Jared Wackerly. Just my name.
Just Jared Wackerly.
Just get at me there.
He is.
Or in the Discord. Go to the Nerd Herd Discord.
Or the Nerd Herd Discord. Yes, absolutely. You can find me at Dynasty Price on. I still have a hard time calling it X. I really do. I still just want to say Twitter.
Well, the URL is still twitter.com. So until they change that, it's still Twitter.
It's still Twitter. Done and done. But yes, you can find us there. This will be roughly an every other week rhythm. We're not going to be married to that, but roughly an every other week rhythm.
Quit saying married.
I mean, we're both married. we're both betrothed.
So you're prognosticating about every other week?
Prognosticating, yeah. I kept wanting to say procrastinating, and I knew that wasn't right. Couldn't figure out to save my life. Anyway, so we'll be back in roughly 2 weeks, depending on how the how we feel, how things go.
Yeah, we'll start getting into some rookie stuff here because Garrett and I, we do the nerd score for Dynasty Nerds. And we're getting into that tape right now, starting to put in some grades. So as we go along, we can kind of talk through that a little bit, maybe give some updates on where we're at with some guys.
What I think we should do, I'm saying this live on the air, so it's not live, it's recorded, but I'm saying it during the show. So just cut this out if you disagree, Jared. But I think this should be the show that we release the nerd scores. However, for that week only, it's a Nerd Herd exclusive. You got to be part of the Nerd Herd that week.
Maybe.
We'll think about it.
We'll see.
We'll talk about it.
Yeah.
We'll
procrastinate. It's a Nerd Herd tool, kind of. It's not really a tool, but a Nerd Herd
resource?
Information resource. Yeah, there's the word.
There it is.
We're doing great. No, I agree. It should be Nerd Herd only, and see if we can do like a live stream for it in Discord or something like that. I'm sure I could figure it out.
It'll be great, though. You'll love it.
You'll love it.
All right. Well, we'll see you guys then. Until then, stay as good looking as Jared Wackerly.
God. See ya.